What's good, everybody? Pete here at Spawn Fly Fish. Do me a favor, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It'll make me happy. I'll tie a better fly, you'll tie a better fly, we'll all catch more fish, so just go ahead and hit them, and we appreciate it. So today, tying kind of this typical Pete fly where there's a lot of material that's going to be thrown on a hook and a shank, more than you probably need, but in the world of fly tying, this is supposed to be fun and entertaining for you, and I really enjoy this part of fly fishing and fly tying, and it's sitting here and coming up with something that will make me happy to throw at these fish. And so in the vise, I've got an SA250 from Ahrex. This is a size 1, and I've got some Veevus 140 Chartreuse thread. I'm just going to go ahead and get that started and trim off the tag. So just follow along with me here. Forgive me if I'm adding too many elements and all that good stuff, but this is the stuff that I really enjoy tying. So I'm going to come back to right where that hook starts to bend down and bring a few thread wraps up. So I love flies for salmon that have a ton of movement and flow and everything else. There will be a time and place for more sparse flies, but I was a little bit successful with some chum the other day, throwing a big chartreuse, flowy, slow dropping fly. And so I'm going to emulate something similar to that using a hook and shank and all that good stuff and lots of pretty material. So I'm just going to tie this in at the rear here, and I am tying this in by the tip. And all I'm going to do now is bring this up. You see the convex or pretty side is facing up, so as I lift this, bring the fibers back. Once I start wrapping this around, all those nice fibers are going to flow to the back, and the good looking side of this feather will face forward so that the fish and the fisher person get to see it as much as possible. So here we go, starting with that big flowy effect. Just going to release those fibers toward the back every time I take a wrap of this feather. And we only need, 3-4 wraps of this thing, and it's going to be big and bushy and flowy, and that's what I like. Alright, so that's good there, not overkill. I'm going to bring that thread back to where we're actually working here, and then I'll tie it off. So what I'm going to do first is create just a little space of where I want to tie this quill, like so, and then create a V from the fibers that I want to keep to the spot where I want to tie off. Once you have that V, the thread goes into the V and traps that quill, like so. 4 or 5 thread wraps right there in that V really solidify the quill. A couple wraps in front, and we can trim out and not worry about that thing moving, like so. Any sparse loose fibers, now's the time to trim, get them out of the way, and there we have a nice flowing tail. So for the rest of this stinger hook, trailing hook, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be a really simple finish here on this portion. So it's a lot of elements, a lot of movement, but not a lot of difficulty in this fly. So our next move here, some polar chenille and chartreuse. And so if you've never used this stuff, it's truly a chenille. Tie it in and wrap it up, and very efficient way to fill in, tie some flies in a quick manner. So now, much like other chenille, this wants to come off in a certain direction, so I'm just going to use that and wrap forward in touching wraps. Nothing crazy. All I'm trying to do is make sure these, as much as possible, these fibers are flowing toward the back. We're not going for anything super crazy here. Just going to offer a little movement on these fibers that are coming off the core. And again, there's no such thing as too much chartreuse for these salmon species. So if you're like me and you love chartreuse and you look for an excuse to use it, well, here's your excuse. So really tie that down nice and strongly, get all those fibers worked back, couple thread wraps in front of it, tie it down, and now we can trim out. And that's about it for the hook on this. So again, make sure those fibers are out of the way, and we'll add a couple whip finishes real quick, and the hook portion is finished. First whip finish, let's do another one. This thing's gonna get chewed up pretty nastily by these big old salmon, so make it as strong as we can. Remove that thread, and right now I've got some Loon hardhead. I'll just go ahead and cover those thread wraps. Nice and even. Nothing to it. Alright, so there we've got a nice even layer of cement over all those thread wraps. So we're not going to lose this after doing all that work we put into it. Alright, so at this point I'm going to pop this little tail section out and set it to the side. And we'll replace it with, this is our Spawn 60 degree 20 millimeter jig shank. And I'm looking for a specific position here because I'm going to be tying off the bottom for our connecting wire, and so I'm going to put it in upside down sort of for what you're used to seeing so that I can do that more easily. Now I'm not going to connect the hook to the shank. We're going to use spider wire to connect it. So at this point I can add my weighted wire, get that bead solidified right where I want it, and tie this arm down. I don't need to leave it in there for any length of time or any purpose to catch a hook. So let me just get some non-lead 0.020 wire wraps going here. And I do like to wrap these shanks a certain way, meaning I like to fill in this neck in front of the arm with wire so that my underbodies are as even as possible. So once I'm just going to clip the front portion on this one, roll that wire over with my scissor, make sure the bulk of the meat on that bead is underneath, and then push that wire up into it. At this point I'm looking where that arm is going to come down, and you see like right there. If I push that arm down right now, it would meet up with the rear portion of that wire, and it's a little tricky because it's trying to still scoot on me. So let me get that trimmed. I'll jam it into the back side of that bead, and then I'll get my thread started, and we will solidify all the positioning of these elements. Alright, like so. And get some thread tucked behind those weighted wires there, and then I can kind of come in here, start pulling that arm down, and really strengthen this whole shank and fly and everything. I'm going to cut out this tag end of the thread, and now with the 45-degree angle wraps, start getting some thread on those weighted wires, and again 45-degree angle up and reverse it on the way back. So now I'll come in straight across and really cinch in all those X wraps, pulling them into the weighted wire, which will not only strengthen the position of the wire but make sure that bead doesn't move on us. Alright, there we go. So for the next portion I have a length of spider wire, and this is just some 30-pound spider wire, and so there are a bunch of ways to attach this. We're just going to go as simple as possible. I'm going to use the open ends here, and I'm going to keep them together and right on the bottom of this shank, and I'll show you here in a second. So you see that's going to sit directly on the bottom of this shank, tie it all the way back, and then I'll come all the way forward, but I'm going to trim out these ends just a touch before I go all the way up there. There we go. And now I can finish wrapping those down. And I don't want this thing to move, and so you'll see my solution here in a second. Alright, so now I've got excess length here, but let's see what we can do. Alright, so 3D beads, Hareline. These are Fuchsia. What I'm going to do now is slip 2 of these onto this wire. Like so. Now I'll go ahead, find that tail that we tied, and so now you can see the orientation of the jig, or the shank. This jig shank now is upside down, and so the hook has to be upside down. It'll match the shank, so if the shank were this way, I'd slip the hook this way onto that wire. Alright, so now I'm going to take, and you can't see this, you'll see it here in a second once it comes back toward the camera lens. So now you can see what I'm going to have here is a loop and then that trailing hook swinging behind those 2 beads. So at this point, how much I pull is going to determine the space between these 2 elements, and that's a very personal decision there. But what I like is to just give it enough room so that there's roughly a bead length between the end of the shank and a bead length between the end of that hook eye. And that's going to allow the maximum amount of swing while still controlling the bead movement, and I don't have to worry about it coming so far forward that it's going to foul or anything like that. So now there's a tricky part, it's this, and it's that you have to run that spider wire back through both of those beads. And so I preach this a lot, but patience, take a deep breath. There's nothing you can't handle if you just calm down slightly. And let's see if this works. Take your time, and again, so there's roughly a bead length in front of there and behind the shank, and so I'm happy with that. I'll go ahead and position this to tie down, and I'm keeping this once again directly on the bottom so that we get a nice inline tracking of our hook and shank. So at this point, to make sure none of this is going to come apart, a little zap-a-gap, and I'm going to just dot some right here on top of that spider wire, so that now I'm going to wrap all the way back again and then start moving forward. And so I'll bring this spider wire almost all the way to behind the bead. I'm going to now cut this and separate that loop that we had cut from the beginning. So now I have 2 individual pieces here. What I want to do now is bring each piece back so that it rides on the side right next to the spider wire on the bottom of the shank. So what I'm saying is position it right next to itself on the way back, and this will just keep everything tracking in line. And I've got a lot of zap-a-gap on here, but that's okay. Once you've got that tied in, go ahead and take it off either side and remove any tags of that spider wire. And you can definitely use like Senyo's trailing wire, you know, some mono, whatever makes you happy in the way you tie your flies. That's the cement or glue that you want to go with. Alright, looking good so far. Again, simple, but just a lot of tedious addition of elements for now. Alright, so to continue this very chartreuse theme fly, we're going to cover this connection so that as this moves through the water, these fuchsia beads give a little blink of contrast. Sometimes it's enough that it causes them to key in on those beads, and you know, so that makes the trailing wire just that much more important if I'm tying this style. They'll attack here, there's no hook for them to catch in front of that, but they will catch that rear hook. Alright, so another marabou feather, and this is Nature's Spirit Spey marabou if you're curious, and fluorescent chartreuse. Tied in the same way by the tip, convex side up, concave facing the hook shank. Twisting a little bit there. There we go. I'm gonna get that tied down, and remember we've got that Zappa gap kind of leaking through our thread wraps a little, so this will really catch any material we add right now and just add a little bit more strength. Once you've got that, a couple wraps is all we're looking for here. Nothing crazy. Again, we're covering that junction where we attached our hook to the shank and adding more movement in the color that they're looking for, which lately Chartreuse is definitely up there as far as top 2-3 colors right now. For me personally, it's the color, but that can change on a day-to-day basis. Tie this guy off. Try to get my fingers out of the way for you guys to see a little bit better. Alright, once I've got it tied down, a couple wraps in front, and we can safely remove that quill. Oh yeah, big, flowy, bright, I love it. Alright, let's get back here, clean that up just a touch, and we're going to go right back in to our lovely polar chenille once again. And if there's something to keep in mind here, it's that we're going to add quite a few elements here in the front. And typically, this is where I'd warn you about not crowding behind that bead. However, this polar chenille really condenses and you can really wrap it down. So if you crowd this just a touch, don't stress. Again, we're going touching wraps, keeping as much of these fibers flowing back as we possibly can. And yes, you could definitely skip some steps here. You could go minimalist mentality on this. Add some of the basics, if you will, or fundamentals of what is making this work. There are a lot of triggers involved in this fly. Is it a specific one, or is it a combination that's making them strike? I can't tell you that, but I can tell you if your fly looks good to you, you're going to fish it with more confidence, and that in itself will help you concentrate. You're going to fish a little bit harder, pay more attention, and that can be the difference between catching fish and wishing you were catching fish. Alright, so now we have a little bling inside the body. We've got our little hotspot beads in the middle. So now let's have some fun. We want to break up all the consistent chartreuse we have going here before we continue. So for the next element, this is Fish Hunter Jumbo Guinea from Nature Spirit. And this is the fluorescent brilliant blue. Again, I've trimmed out the tip, and I'm just going to wrap this in the same way that we did the Marabou. So as you can see, I've come back about a bead length behind our bead here, and I'm just going to trim out this tag end of our guinea feather, and then 1 or 2 turns. That's all I'm looking for here. As you can see, it's not a huge feather. It's not going to reach all the way back. It's just going to break that front portion up, that thoracic section, if you will. And so get those fibers moving back if you can, and then we'll start wrapping. There's one good wrap, and now let's get one more in there, because I love this blue. Try to not cross over those fibers if you can. Alright, so at this point I want to get into that fluff. I don't want any fluff in this fly. So I'm going to come down on that quill a little bit, make a better separation spot. And again, you can see I'm almost right behind the bead already, but I'm not stressed. We're going to make this work because we're using all the elements that we can really squish down and create room if we need to. So these fibers here are starting to get some of that wispiness to them, and that's fine. I just don't want them in here. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Alright, so now let's add some bling to this thing. I'm going to wrap down over that feather that we just tied in and create a little platform for myself. So now you can see this is almost like a throat sitting in the inside of this fly in a blue, which again, another trigger color that these fish will respond to. So now I'm going to create a bit of a topper of flash, and so for this I've got some ice wing fiber, and this is fluorescent chartreuse. We don't need a ton of it, but I do need enough that for sure the fish are going to see this. So once I've grabbed a bunch here, a small group, I'll lay that in like so, and you get the idea. What I'm going to do is just double this over my thread, and for me this is a no-brainer as far as the easiest way to add this kind of stuff onto a fly. I want this coming right off the top, and that's it. Use your thumb, kind of mash it down, and that way it'll spread out just a little bit on the top for dorsal effect. And then as far as where I'm gonna, cut or trim this stuff, I just want it sneaking toward the back there, so that as it's swimming, I don't have to worry about any of it really getting trapped into the hook point. That's all I'm looking for. Nothing specific, nothing, there are no hard set rules on this. We're just having fun on the vise. So right on top of that, I'm coming in with another ice wing, and this happens to be light blue pearl smolt. And as far as how much, I'm going to use about half of what I used of the chartreuse. So I'm following now, connecting that blue feather that we just used, that blue Guinea, by adding a little bit of blue highlight, if you will, on top of that chartreuse flash. And in the water it becomes something very different. It's really noticeable. It really seemed to make a difference the other day fishing for these chum. Certain flies were just, as soon as you got it in the water, it was getting looks, it was getting eats, and then other flies, they'd come up hesitantly and just kind of pass on it. And this was the color that they definitely were not passing on. So there we go. I'll show you what that looks like. We have blue, we have the chartreuse underneath. When this thing is moving in the water, it has a little kick to it, and it does show up in a big way. Alright, thanks for bearing with me. You guys are rock stars. Here we got our final element. We are going back one more time to that chartreuse marabou. And I've got it tied in by the tip like we did the last few feathers. Get that started right there. And this is just going to bring the whole thing together, keeping on that theme of chartreuse and a lot of movement, slow moving movement too with this marabou. Flow, it's very undulating, very natural movement. I got that where we want it. Bring those fibers back and simply begin wrapping this final element, this collar, and then all we have to do is find a gap in the reining and go fishing. So forgive my fingers here for a minute. Couple wraps, maybe 3 at the most, I would think, is all we're going to need here. And try to keep all those fibers from trapping another fiber. There we go. One more wrap here is all we're going to get in, and it's more than enough. Start cleaning off a tie-off spot in this quill, separating the fibers forward and back. Once you do that, nothing left but to tie it off. As you can see, I've got a lot of marabou fiber up here, and I'm happy about that. There's definitely not too much. This has got to move, it's got to be flowy. And the nice thing about this, with this much material, once you cast it, you have a few seconds to watch this sink. And so you get an idea of its movement, and then that helps you interpret how you should be stripping it back, if you should dance it, try to twitch it and get a jig motion out of it, whatever. Alright, clean these little fibers up here a little bit, and we're ready to whip finish and go fill a net. I find my whip finisher. I swear this thing has legs and just walks around when I'm not paying attention. And 2 whip finishes coming at you. There's one. Oh, trapped the fiber. Get that out real quick. And a second whip finish. And don't forget, these flies are designed for you to interpret the way not only you fish, but the way you think the fish are looking at your fly. So if you think you figured something out, well, trust it until you can disprove it or prove it. Just trust it, go with it. You know, create your own style both at the vise and on the water. Watch and listen to those who are successful and then make it work for you. So we're going back in here with some Loon hardhead clear. I'm just going to cover all these thread wraps very well. It's a big fly, and it's intended for very big, aggressive fish. And once they hit that salt water, those teeth take on a life of their own. So protect it as much as you can. And there we have it, folks. A little articulated, flowy, big chartreuse, hot spot pink to match. We have blue to break up that contrast, and with the Guinea feather, as well as the blue on top to bring it all together. So there you go. You are now ready to go out and catch some salmon. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Tie up a bunch of them. Again, if you haven't already, please hit like and subscribe, and we will see you guys on the water.